Yeah, so hi everyone. I'm happy you all got here. Um, my name is Uli, and my goal for this talk, I have like two goals for this talk, I think. One goal is if you're not using GraphQL today, to show you that it's easier than what you think, and to maybe change the way of what is the onboarding process for you of GraphQL, what does it mean for you. That it's not a new thing that is like completely new and all your knowledge is gone and you learn a new thing, but it's basically an enhancement of the things you already are doing today. And my other goal is that if you're using GraphQL today, I want to make your lives a bit easier and more safe and also more automated on things you might do manually today. So maybe before, just a question, who here is using GraphQL already? Okay, like less than half the room. Cool. Great. So I think you would love this talk. And so we're here like the guild. The people that work with me on the guild knows that I like to talk a lot. So luckily I'm less. So they will have to force me out of here. So also, if you have questions during, ask during. Like I don't care. Just shout your question. Don't wait for the end. So just a bit about who are we and why are we here. The guild is a group of open source developers. It means that we develop a lot of open source libraries, but it is all under the individual contributors. So if you're using GraphQL, you're probably using our tools already, but maybe you just don't know that. You know, tools like GraphQL Code Generator, GraphQL Inspector or GraphQL modules, and I'm not going to list all of them because there's a lot, and you can see that on our on our shirts. But basically, the reason we build so much open source is because this is our goal. Like this is the goal of the organization. It was built for that. The whole financial structure is built like that, and the reason is we want to make just developing applications and APIs easier. And that means we don't want to lock you in. So we have a lot of different libraries that, you know, if you use all of them together, then it comes into like this one big platform. But we have no reason to lock you into anything. So all these libraries are completely separate, work by themselves, and you can work with any other technology, our biggest competitors. We don't mind. Like, do it. This is a bit about the philosophy of the guild. But today I'm going to talk about GraphQL Mesh. It's one of our most popular libraries or frameworks. It depends on how you look at it. And the title of this talk and the title of the library is like query anything, run anywhere. So I'm going to talk about what it means query anything and what it means run anywhere, because it's a lot. I'm not going to repeat about everything that everyone told here today. There are people here that are not using GraphQL yet. So, you know, the basic premise of GraphQL is that you describe data, any data, as a schema, and it literally could be any data, and then you can query it. You can basically, as the consumer, you can say, I want this and not that, and give me just that. And that's a very powerful thing. So, you know, when you look at like the basic GraphQL execution, this is the overly simplified version of it, of course. The client is asking for like, we're describing a schema that describes basically what we have in our data sources. And then the client says, okay, give me user with ID 2 and just the name of the user. So the GraphQL engine will like magically, you know, go fetch what it needs, extract what it needs, and just send you like, you know, one request with just what you asked for, which is cool. And then let's say, you know, you want to ask for more data about that user, and maybe that data sits in another place. So as the user, you don't care, consumer in that case, you don't care. GraphQL will, let's call it, auto-magically do the processing work, whatever that means. We'll fetch stuff in parallel if it can. We'll optimize things if it can. And even if some of the data comes from a third-party API or like a CMS or something, it's fine. The client will just get a result as if everything was in one place and everything was great. So, you know, many people, when they talk about the basics of GraphQL, they say, you know, the most amazing thing about it is that like you have less requests over the network and less data over the network. It's just what I asked and just the information that I need, so it's more efficient. That's true. So you get the network performance and you get the consumer performance because they need to do less work. But I personally think that there's much bigger benefits for GraphQL. The bigger benefits come from like the day-to-day of the developer and the developer productivity. So first of all, we got a schema, like a unified schema of all the data that we have that we can query, which I think is an extremely valuable thing, like a data graph of everything, we can use, all the data that we have. We are automating orchestration and automation. Like we're automating orchestration of network, which today, all of the people here that didn't raise their hand, when I asked about GraphQL, like you're doing it manually. You're writing controllers, you're writing code, and that's okay. You can keep doing it, and it creates jobs and stuff. But if you can automate it, then it's way more scalable, and you can do other jobs. And also it creates explicit relationship between like who is responsible of what on the data, on how you define the data in your organization. So those I believe are, in my opinion, much bigger benefits than just the network benefits which are there. Okay, but this talk is about something else. Like everyone here, there's been a lot of talks about why you should use GraphQL. But what happens to us when we are working with a lot of like organizations and we get in GraphQL, everyone is getting excited. And then, there's this part. There's like all the old stuff that we're querying, right? GraphQL, what's cool about GraphQL is that you can, and I think why it's like exploding so fast, is that you can build like an amazing API, an amazing, very modern layer, like all the cool companies, on like the shittiest infrastructure you can think of. So that's a cool thing, and that's why mostly like product. Usually people come to us from the product teams, like the front end applications, the mobile applications. Some people who are working on data pipelines, like they just want to get the data from whatever crazy place the data sits in. But that made us, to start asking, but as we got into all those companies and we got GraphQL in and everyone was happy and iterations became quickly, there were like the next question came of like, what are we doing with everything that we have? Should we now migrate everything to GraphQL, which, might make sense if you have all the time in the world and like, we can have big philosophical debates if it's like the end goal is to have everything to be GraphQL. It's not necessarily, even inside the guild, we have a lot of debates about that. Or should we build like small proxies in front of like all these things and federate everything? Maybe that could be also a good solution, and especially there's like some companies that could make a lot of money if you would do that. But maybe there's another way. Like we just wanted to something. We were on the ground working with people, and we wanted something that works. So we actually asked ourselves, like, what do we actually want from GraphQL? Like we're looking at all this existing infrastructure, all this existing work that people are doing, and working with people that, if we tell them, hey, there's a new thing, like forget about OpenAPI, forget about there's a GraphQL, it's a cool shiny thing, they will be like, okay, talk to me after. They're not getting excited for me. So what do we actually want from GraphQL? And I think, the idea of a schema and that is very easily read by, even if you're even not a programmer, not a developer, you can read the schema and understand it. And the fact that you can query, like as a consumer, you can say what you want and then the engine that executes it can do many things automatically for you. Those are the things that we really want from GraphQL. And all those existing services, it doesn't matter how old they are, the notion of a schema and an API and queries, it's not like GraphQL invented all of this. Like we had OData, we had SOAP, and we have many SQL, we have like many different things. Like GraphQL didn't come from void. So what if we forget for a second the name? Like let's put GraphQL aside, let's put OpenAPI aside, let's just talk in abilities, let's just talk in what we actually want to do. And then let's look at what we have. We already have schemas and protocols in many of our services. We already have some docs or developer portals or whatever you build for it. And we also have live data and logs. Like we can see what's actually happening. Like most of the work that people do today on API, they looked at the logs and are trying to like figure out what the hell is going on like in the API that I'm querying. So we have all these things there. We're doing it anyway. So if we have all these things, why won't we take all these things and then just generate GraphQL? Let's not go to GraphQL. Let's just generate the abilities that we want, and it doesn't matter the language. It doesn't matter anything. And that's the idea of GraphQL Mesh. So let's go do this cool. So basically, you can take like any API and merge it into one GraphQL thing. So let's start with the with the core premise of like query anything. What does it mean query anything? Literally everything. So you can see all the list of stuff here. So Open API and Swagger. We can take Open API and Swagger and generate GraphQL schemas and then send queries to them. We can do the same for OData. We worked with Microsoft, by the way, on the OData part. And OData is very interesting because it's basically a way to query your API. It just looks ugly. But so it's just so basically, but it's the same idea. It's not like we invented anything. The gRPC SOAP, we have a schema. It's XML, but like it's still it's still typed and it's working, and many others. So now if you can do all that, let's see an example. So here you can see like an Open API, very small one. Usually they're coming in much bigger files and scattered around all kinds of stuff. And then let's take this Open API and let's feed it into Mesh with like a simple configuration where you find a file. Mesh, by the way, thanks to Arda that sits here, really understand. Like we really did a lot. We had to build our own parsing library for Open API. And with like references and stuff like that. So even if you're not using GraphQL and you hate GraphQL, you should talk to us because during this process, we gained a lot of knowledge about Open API, about basically all the other APIs that I've shown you before. So it was very interesting just to look at like all the differences between all the APIs out there and the open source tools that are out there to parse them and to understand them. So I don't think there's a lot of bigger experts than Arda that sits right here. So we take this Open API schema, we feed it into Mesh with a simple configuration, and what we get is an executable GraphQL schema. So that's it. That's how. Let's see another example. Like, what if we don't have a schema? We just have live data. We just have JSON running around. So we build a tool that like look at your schema and then look at your traffic and then generates. It basically generates like a JSON schema out of it, and you just need to tell Mesh, hey, here are all the example files are, and then we take that and again we generate a GraphQL schema that you can query. So now you can query GraphQL. Here is another example of like, we're now adding other sources, like we have multiple sources here. One is GraphQL endpoint, second is another GraphQL endpoint, and the third is the Stripe API that is not GraphQL. And we query the Stripe API, we input the schema into it, and also it needs authorization, so we send authorization, and then we merge it all into one GraphQL API. So Stripe, they don't know it, but they have a GraphQL API now. So basically that means that with the query anything that clients or consumers can get, they work with the services that don't know what GraphQL is as if they were GraphQL. So the consumers get what they want, get the cool experience. The providers don't even know what's happening. So we take the best of GraphQL, we're using our existing services, and even under the hood, we're using the original protocol, right? So all of our whatever old toolings or existing toolings that we have to monitor all of those and everything still works. But the consumer already got the GraphQL experience, can already start enjoying this thing. But then, we took all those different sources, we converted them into GraphQL. One of the powerful things in GraphQL is like the fact that we can join them. And there's many names for it: federation, schema stitching, type merging. There's many different terms, but now we can turn all of those and merge them into one single GraphQL execution. We can, by the way, do multiple merges, right? This is something that we can talk about it later. But so GraphQL Mesh also composes all these different sources that weren't GraphQL into one GraphQL graph. Right, like here you can see, SQL, gRPC, OpenAPI, and also, by the way, queue systems. Like the talk before me was exactly demonstrated that. Like we can take anything that is like a pub/sub mechanism or a webhook, and we can turn, because GraphQL has the notion of push updates, like GraphQL subscriptions, live queries. So we can take all these whatever tool or type of communication that you have and convert it into like a GraphQL verb. So you can listen to a webhook or to a pub/sub or like a message from Kafka and like subscribe to it and then send a query, and a subscription in GraphQL comes with a query. So now I can basically not only listen to a real-time event, I can also enhance that data from multiple sources, and when I start to work, I get all the data that I need in real time. Now, okay, so then comes so if we take it one step further, we now have this merging of all the different APIs, and we're automatically converting them. And that's fine, but usually, our APIs are not perfect. If you go to the real world, there's like all kinds of weird stuff. That's why most of the people today write their schemas manually. So what we added was the ability to do all kinds of transformations also on each one of these sources. So, you can manipulate the data. Let's say, I have like a SOAP service and their naming convention is like weird with capital case or whatever. I can, convert it into camel case automatically. Or I can, I can alter the resolvers. I can, I can filter some of the fields. I can do it on the handler level, like on the source level, or on the merged schema layer. So I can basically automatically create configurations that then creates let's call it the perfect graph. And it's also in configurations and not in code. So, we can also do it in code if you want, but which sometimes you have to. But when you have it in configurations, you can then show it to the underlying teams and tell them, look, this is actually how we query you. If you would change this will also gives visibility or some signal to the underlying teams that don't know what GraphQL is, to tell them, hey, here are things that if you would do, we will just remove this configuration. So you probably should do it. Whether they do it or not, you don't care. You can just use those tools and move on. So all these things, basically, this is a big sentence, but it's just because all kinds of people are saying big sentences. But basically, it turns GraphQL Mesh into the graph of everything, right? Like there's a lot of talk about federation. So you can basically, with GraphQL Mesh, you can have a federated architecture for any API service. It doesn't need to be a special federated sub-service. It doesn't need to. It can be just a regular GraphQL service or an OpenAPI service or a REST API or whatever. You can federate it. You don't need to buy into some special technology in order to federate your stuff. You can just use your existing things. So that was the query anything part. That's already like a big part of the talk. You can clap and everything. But then there's another, there's a whole other section of run anywhere. Because now there's, yeah? So,
one question before the other.
Of course.
For the composition, when you have an open API specification, usually you have resources and you have like an ID from another table and so on. How do you handle the composition by this?
So you mean how do we associate it?
Yeah, or you compose. Or how do you associate within the schema multiple entities together?
So this is what we use under the hood in GraphQL Mesh. So the question was, how do we actually take all those different sources that we converted into GraphQL and we merge them into one graph with creating the associations? So under the hood, it uses schema stitching. It used to be that GraphQL Mesh used both. You could plug and play schema stitching and Apollo Federation. What happened in the last year or 2 years is that people don't know it, but schema stitching became a superset of Apollo Federation. So you can basically drop in, replace schema stitching with your Apollo Federation gateway, and everything will still work. So we can read, if you use the Federation standard for associating the specific services, schema stitching can read that. But also schema stitching can use other techniques like type merging, and it really depends on, it's way more flexible. It's like you can think about it as a framework to build Federation-like merging. So I can give an hour talk on that, and also Arda is here, so he's like the expert, so you can also ask him. But basically, we're using under the hood schema stitching, and that gives us a lot of flexibility. That means also that part of your graph you can actually take Apollo subservices, right? It could be an open API and then Apollo subservice. You can take an open API and then we have a transform that adds Federation metadata on existing open API service that then you can use in order to merge it together with everything. So you can even use, let's say, Federation metadata, but you don't have to do it on the subgraph level. You can do it or on the transform level, let's say. So that's the query anything part. Then there's the run anywhere part. So Mesh not only is doing, and by the way, the fact that Mesh is doing a lot shouldn't scare you, because like I said at the beginning of the talk, everything here is like a sub component or like a sub library of that. So you can just take the query anything part and forget everything I'm going to say, and that's fine. Or you can take all the part of what I'm going to say about running anywhere and execution and gateways and clients and use just that part. So all the stuff that we build are completely separate. But if we're looking at all of this together, GraphQL Mesh is also a framework that helps shapes and build executable GraphQL schema for multiple sources. That's a big question that basically means run anywhere, but what does it mean? How does Mesh work? It basically means that, like we said, we configured all of our data sources, we created the transforms, maybe we create custom code, right? Sometimes in most companies, we see some people take the existing sources, convert them, manipulate them with the existing configs, but then they also want to create custom code, custom resolvers, custom configurations, like a completely, let's call it a new GraphQL code. All of this comes together into one gateway, and then we run the build process. The build process basically creates an executable that then can run anywhere. What does it mean it can run anywhere? If I need to simplify that, I can say it can run as a gateway or it can run as an SDK. What do I mean? Gateway means I can now, this will be my GraphQL gateway. So there's a lot to do with it. This is basically my gateway to the wall. This is how my applications will call my service, will call my merged graph. And that means a couple of things, like Lauren mentioned it in the previous talk. And then there's an SDK. So the SDK could run basically, I can take all of this, and that's why, by the way, that's the origin of the main mesh. It doesn't need to be like a central place. I can take all of this logic, all of this amazing processing stuff, and I can run it as an SDK. So now I have that SDK can run on other service that queries maybe different other service, and for that service, the developers of that service, it feels for them like they're calling this central place that has all the information, but at runtime, it calls directly those services. So it's decentralized. You don't need to necessarily introduce this single point of failure in the middle. But also it means that, and that's something I think the most popular use case for people starting using Mesh when they're getting into GraphQL early on, it's let's say there's an SDK that you can run on your Next.js app. So now you can have basically the graph of everything without asking anyone in your organization to introduce a new gateway, right? You can have basically one graph, you're querying it, but it's all running on your client app. So then the product, the client developers can get everything they want. And when the organization is ready, they're like, okay, let's now move this to the gateway level and get also kind of more performance benefits. So yeah, so Mesh, can take all these sources and run as a central thing that everything goes through that has pluses and minuses, or can run as an SDK. And many, many different SDKs also has pluses and minuses. There's like videos here, you know, about how to run each one of those, like complete tutorials on like, you know, step by step, how to do it in this way or in that way. Now, going back to the gateway part, today gateways, you know, today gateways are evolving. Like we used to just run them on our own, you know, data centers and everything, but today, you know, we want to run them on edge, and we also want to do all kinds of things. So GraphQL Mesh under the hood is using GraphQL Yoga, the Yoga server that we built. And there's many cool things there that I maybe can talk about later on, but one very important feature of it is that we build it in the way that without you changing anything or being aware or doing anything in your code, the GraphQL Mesh Gateway can run on basically any JavaScript environment. What does it mean? Any version of Node, any you know, Node framework that you have, like Express or Fastify or Koa or things like that. But also it can run on Cloudflare workers. It can run on Edge. So it can run on Cloudflare workers, it can run on Dino, and it can run on Bun. I don't know how many of you know about Bun, but it's a really, really cool stuff. So it works on it. And that means that that gateway can run, let's say, on Edge on Cloudflare workers. But it's also a gateway, so that means we want to maybe introduce caching. So that caching, the gateway can run on Cloudflare workers, and when you can use Cloudflare for the caching part. So, you know, you're as close as you can to your consumer, and you just hit the cache there, and then later on you bring the real data from your actual sources that are maybe not even GraphQL. So you have this like worldwide edge GraphQL gateway that, you know, and when it comes to gateway, you know, you want many things. That's why you introduce plugins. It uses under the hood another library that, again, you can use separately, which is Yoga and Envelope. So we have the Envelope plugin system that hooks into the GraphQL execution. So that means you can introduce, you know, tracing and monitoring with, you know, whatever you want. Sentry, Datadog, New Relic, OpenTelemetry. Just with a plugin. You can introduce like, you know, integrations with like Auth0 or whatever authentication you want in there, and of course GraphQL Armor that was mentioned before with like if you want to add security stuff and things like that. A lot of stuff. Yeah, here's just another example of like you know, here we're basically, you know, we're taking like a JSON schema source that we don't even have a schema for. And we introduced like, you know, response cache plugin that runs on Cloudflare, and that's it. You get like basically from a I don't know, a very, let's say, slow or far away REST API without the schema. Now you get like an on-edge cached GraphQL API. Yes, a question. You mean like if you want to run it on native iOS or something?
Or if my app is another language, like I can my app in Python or in...
Yeah, so not yet, but it's coming. But because everything here is based on JavaScript. Yeah. But yeah, any JavaScript environment basically. Yes. Yeah. You can run it in. That's the whole point. Like it can be your client. So outside of your client, maybe you don't even. There's no notion of GraphQL at all. But when you build your client, everything is GraphQL, as if GraphQL is all over the world in your organization. By the way, another thing, if we're looking at all these plugins, like let's say you have now this amazing, magical GraphQL Gateway, but you have consumers that hate GraphQL for whatever reason. So we had a project called the SOFA. The SOFA project basically takes, because we believe that GraphQL is a superset of other protocols, and again, we constantly look at like the differences between the different protocols. So we build a library that basically looks at your GraphQL schema and generates Open API schema for it. So you can basically, this gateway can also expose REST endpoints. And then you can have consumers that are like feeling very happy with their Open API and they're going to praise Open API forever, but they really are under the hood using GraphQL. How much time do I have?
1 minute.
1 minute. Okay, so this was basically the main part of my talk. Which I hope convinced you that like GraphQL, let's not call it GraphQL, it's just a superset or just like all kinds of abilities that you can build today on top of your existing APIs. You don't need to learn, and to build everything from scratch. But that means also, and I'll take, because I'm the last one, I'll take a couple more minutes just to one last point, is that GraphQL, for people that are GraphQL experts, they know that GraphQL has more benefits. Like, you can manage, Lauren, a couple of people have mentioned it, like you can manage versions, you can prevent breaking changes by looking at what things are happening. Like we have really cool tools in GraphQL that, going around that conference and like looking about a lot of the talks about like upcoming features in Open API and all kinds of cool tools that are not open source. In GraphQL, we have some of these things. Like GraphQL Inspector is like an existing open source tool that, basically looks at different versions of your API and tells you if there was a breaking changes or not. It runs on your CI, for example. It can give you like, notifications or Slack, whatever. It basically runs on each PR and tells you if you broke anything. It can also run on your old schema and tell you, hey, this is very similar to the other thing. Maybe is it the same thing? And also can look at what people are actually using, what people are actually querying, and telling you, oh, this field is actually not used. Maybe you can remove it. So all those are cool new things that, I wish we could use it in Open API, or I wish we could use it on our REST endpoints. Well, I'll just add one more thing. You can also, GraphQL Inspector is doing it statically. Hive is doing it with live data. So not only looking at the code, but actually looking at the live data and then telling you nobody used this field for the last 30 days, so you can delete it, safely delete it, and you don't need to introduce versions. This is just a list of all kinds of stuff that Hive is doing. I'm going to go through it. I'm going to skip all of those things. It's a really great tool. You should use it. It's SaaS, but it's also completely open source and exactly the same. There's nothing in the open source that doesn't exist on SaaS. So you can take self-hosted, don't pay us nothing, go for it. We will be very happy with it. And it's a very successful SaaS, more successful than we expected. So all these things are very powerful, but now, with everything I told you, you could use Hive, you could use GraphQL Inspector, you could, manage your breaking changes, not on GraphQL, but on your existing APIs. So now all the power that people here are trying to convince you to use and to move to GraphQL tools, to move to GraphQL so you can enjoy all these things, you don't need to move to GraphQL to enjoy all these things. You can just use the GraphQL tools and just on top of your existing stuff. So that's the point. The point of the talk is don't think GraphQL, think APIs, think about your abilities and how to get them with your existing stuff, leverage everything you already have in your organization, evolve gradually, all the time do the smallest step, the smallest MVP that gives you value. And you can manage and track everything because now you can have all the tools in the GraphQL ecosystem on your regular APIs. So thank you for the talk, for listening. And I just want to mention one last thing. Thanks for not kicking me out. Everything in the guild, like I said, is under people. We don't promote the guild, we promote the people. And everything I was talking here about was the work of one. We all work together, but was mostly the work of one person that sits here in the second row. That's Arda. You should follow everything that he's doing and talk to him after. So thank you. Thank you very much. Questions? Questions or?
Any additional questions?
Yeah, let's go.
You can come and talk to
Yeah,
me
like
directly.
it's anyway the conference is done, so I can be
Thank
here
you.
for the next 2 days.
Thank you very much for coming, and we hope you enjoyed the GraphQL track at Apidays. See you next year.
Thank you.